I must admit it's hard um, to follow everything that was said, but at the same time, um, to think of what I want to say today, um, because we're exhausted as Palestinians. I'm exhausted. Actually, coming here was exhausting. Shireen had to, 8 hours at the borders. We only had, we only waited 3 hours. Took us only 3 hours to cross. Just think of that. And we were pleased that it took us 3 hours. And then I come and to be honest, I've written a lot, but then I'm listening and asking myself, how many more summits, how many more conferences, how many more papers? And the real question is, are we making any difference? Am I making any difference? Can we change anything? Are empires destined to win? Or as we were discussing in the airport, they just transform themselves. And, we were talking at the airport. I'm not sure if you paid attention to Rifat's resume. It's very impressive. It's long. And he was telling me stories, it's a long journey. He was telling me stories of advocacy trips he's done, in the 80s, 90s? His struggle as a youth for liberation in the 70s. And he was telling me, are we wasting our time? Did we waste our life for nothing? This is the moment we find ourselves in right now as Palestinians. Because whatever we've done, we've seen, what more do you need more than a genocide being broadcast live on air? Are you watching the images of the starved children being killed every day? This is about the urgency, We're talking about Christian Zionism while children are being starved. What more can we do? We're in the process of writing Kairos 2. In South Africa, there was only one Kairos, right? So it feels hard to all of a sudden shift into, let's talk in an academic way about Christian Zionism. We're doing it because we're shaken, we're troubled, we're outraged by the fact that theology played a role in all of this. So this should shake us. What more needs to be said about Christian Zionism? A lot has been said in this conference. I'm going to try to add some things about it, but also hopefully offer some practical things. What can we do? Because I think we need to leave this conference with a determination that we must change things. Enough. And to do so, I think we need to look at Christian Zionism in a more honest and real way. There are many definitions for Christian Zionism, and I want to offer yet another one. Christian Zionism is simply Christian support for Zionism. Christian support for Zionism. And I think for way too long, we have analyzed Christian Zionism by focusing on the biblical side, the Christian side, and we've left aside the Zionist side. So to talk about Christian Zionism, I think it's imperative that we address Zionism and then discuss Christian Zionism, as I said, as political, financial, and theological support to Zionism. And I hope that it has already been established that we cannot continue to think of Christian Zionism as an evangelical phenomena or a fundamentalist phenomena pointing to people like John Hagee or Mike Huckabee or Mike Johnson. Because it's much, much more deeper than that. A statement like Jews return to their land can be found, I'm sure, in almost every Christian tradition in the West and then exported other places, as we've heard to the global South. Jews return to their land immediately makes me as the Palestinian, as the stranger. It's not my land, it's their land. If you think of the power of such a statement, again, it's so much found in so many circles. Or even, if you go to the liberal seminaries, the idea of the eternal Abrahamic covenant, the worst thing you can maybe be called in a seminary or in academic circles is supersessionist. Maybe that's the worst thing you can be called. And everybody wants to avoid that. How? By emphasizing the eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people that includes the land. So let's not make evangelical Christian Zionism the scapegoat, and let's address the actions of Christian Zionism. And let's remember, and I think Tony touched on this, how this war manifested to us a very ugly face of Christian Zionism, namely the churches who echoed the Zionist narrative. Again, this is why I emphasize, Christian Zionism is Christian support to Zionism. So when Zionists say this is a war of self-defense, and you have prominent church leaders who would actually speak condescendingly against dispensationalism and John Hagee and so on, repeat the Zionist narrative. You tell me, is this not worse than John Hagee and Mike Huckabee? They repeated, and as I wrote, their statements, church statements, could have been written by the Israeli government. It was shocking for us how they defended the genocide. And then the thing that Christian Zionist has done, and this is my second point, has to do with the use of scripture and how they managed to convince the world, especially the Christian world, that the question of Palestine has to do mainly with biblical text and promises, and that we can detach from the Bible notions of possession and entitlement. What Zionists relied on to prove their right to come and possess the land of Palestine was the religious text and their interpretation of religious entitlement. So by this, Zionism and Christian Zionism have managed to create one of the strongest, and I would argue, deceptive narratives of today, a colonial narrative in our modern history, by which a Jew born in London is entitled to move to Palestine, dispossess Palestinians, take their land, dispel them out as refugees, and oppress them, those who remained in the land. And then all of this is described as Jews returning to the land, biblical prophecy, or biblical history. It's one of the strongest deceptive narratives that exist in most churches today. This is the power of narrative, a narrative that has rendered me as Palestinians, the native of the land, the aliens, maybe the invaders, or the enemies of God. Our guilt is our address. And so we must ask, is the Bible or any religious text the basis by which we determine whether one people group is entitled and the other is not? Is there any other context in the world in which we use a religious text to determine who is entitled to live in the land and who is not? Is there any other context in the world in which religious text is used to solve a political dispute? And my fear is that we as Palestinians, even as Palestinian Christians, have fallen into this trap. And we were forced to do exegesis, to write a PhD on the promised land while children are being starved in Gaza, and debate Romans 11 using your framework, and learn Greek and Hebrew to become credible so that you believe me, and always say I am educated in Oxford so that you take my word seriously. And thinking that, if we manage to show you that your interpretation is wrong, we managed to solve the Palestinian question. And as if you need a PhD actually to show that dispensationalism is flawed theologically. Seriously.
This is what I told you.
It's too late. Is this really how we solve the question of Palestine? Does the fate of millions of Palestinians and Israelis depend on how some evangelical theologians interpret Romans 11? This is what we have. And in this, we put aside, we trump the international law, human rights, They exist for a reason. They're not perfect. But the reference point cannot be a religious text, for these texts are particular to certain religious communities and do not have universal consensus. If your side of the argument is, my God told me so, or God gave me the land, or God gave the land to our ancestors as an eternal possession, then how can we argue? What's the response? Your God says this, my God says this. Let's make it a war between the gods, honestly. And to think that this is what the Western world taught us to do. This is not like a theology that's coming from Arab Muslim countries, bringing God into the discussion. If religious texts are to be used, it is to promote faith values, justice, dignity of human lives, equality, and protection of the vulnerable. And the irony, the tragic irony for Palestinians, is that our human rights are abused by religious texts, the very same texts that are supposed to protect these rights. Christian Zionism as a colonial theology. It's already mentioned. And I think, again, it's really important. Rather than, yes, let's do exegesis, but rather than doing exegesis, let's listen to what Christian Zionism are telling us, what Christian Zionists are telling us. They want to convince us that Jews are entitled to live in and possess the land of Palestine because God gave this piece of land to their ancestors thousands of years ago. And we must simply accept this because the Bible says so. And by the way, I'm going to go out a lot from my text. If you want to see the hypocrisy of Christian Zionist beliefs, try to listen to what Christian Zionists are saying, and then replace the word Jews with Arabs and Muslims and the word God with Allah. Allah gave us the land as an eternal possession as Muslims. Imagine if a Muslim leader says this, a politician. Imagine the uproar. But somehow, it's okay. God, according to Christian Zionism, for some theological or biblical reason, has made an eternal, unconditional covenant with a group of ethno-religious group that includes giving them a piece of property, Palestine, and this offer is valid at all times and gives them entitlement to even displace whoever lives in that land. This offer, in addition, trumps any international law or human rights because it's biblical rights. Many times when I talk to Christian Zionists, I say, are you listening to yourselves? Are you listening to yourself in terms of what you are telling us, imposing your beliefs on millions of Palestinians and Arabs? And we just simply have to accept this. Forget history, recent or ancient. Forget the fact that Palestinians have been living in and farming their lands for centuries. None of this matters. God gave them the land. Imposing religious beliefs of millions of people, abusing their rights, threatening their existence, and somehow this is supposed to be the good news. And mind you, we're talking about the same people group who emphasize separation of state and religion. So let's treat Christian Zionism for what it is, promoting a tribal, racist, violent God. This is what Christian Zionism is. And this, we must all say, is not the God of the Bible revealed in Jesus Christ. And of course, to do so, they have to rely more than just biblical interpretations. As Tony said, it's not about one verse we pick here or another place. It's much deeper than that. It's a worldview. And in my first book, The Other Side of the World, I talked a lot about Christian Zionism as colonial theology or the theology of empire. What does that mean? I talked about the employment of God. God is on our side. It's not about the chosen people. It's about a chosen state. Opposing Israel in that ideology is opposing God. For Jews have a divine right to the land, a divine right to the land. And this is, Tony mentioned the Christianity Today. Russell Moore, who's supposed to be a progressive, anti-Trump evangelical ethicist, he said, and I kid you not, he said, attacking Jews is attacking Jesus himself and even attacking all Christians. And of course, he was talking about a political thing in Palestine and what happened. And of course, the idea about you must bless Israel because you definitely don't want to go against Israel or you will be cursed because God is on the side of empire. It gives them legitimacy for even acts of violence. It makes all those who oppose, by the way, not just Israel, even America, enemies of God or any ally of Israel. The interview between Tucker Carlson and the senator was mentioned, Ted Cruz. But before that, I'm not sure you followed that, in the war, there was a congressional hearing about the encampments set up on numerous US universities. I'm going to need more than that. In protest against the war. And in that congressional hearing, Representative Rick Allen from Georgia asked the president of Columbia University if she was familiar with Genesis 12. And he quoted Genesis 12 to her. And he says it's pretty clear. It was a covenant that God made with Abraham. And that covenant was really clear. If you bless Israel, I will bless you. Of course, it was if you... And then he used that text to intimidate and terrorize when he said, do you consider that a serious issue? Do you want Columbia University to be cursed by the God of the Bible? That's a congressional hearing. This is a member of the Congress, in the Congress. Again, imagine if Ilhan Omar did it, saying, do you want to be cursed by the God of the Quran, by Allah? Imagine Fox News coverage that day. Actually, that month. Faris Abu Farha called this spiritual terrorism, and I agree. They relativize justice. It doesn't matter. Justice is siding with Israel. That's what we are told. They control the narrative. They control theologies. They bully anyone who disagrees with them and label them. This is why it's a colonial theology. If you disagree with Christian Zionism, you are labeled as a replacement theologian and by extension an anti-Semite. You are targeted and disinvited. Talk to us about being disinvited as Palestinians. We Palestinians cannot even talk about our experience under oppression without controlling which words we can use and which words we cannot use. Remember how many times we were told not to use the word apartheid, the A word. Now it's the G word. We were told you can't, be offensive and you have to be careful for the ears of your listeners to win them. They're more concerned about the ears of the listeners more than they are about children starved in Gaza. So it's not even the church silent about the atrocities. They don't want even to talk. They don't want us to talk about it. Even we're called anti-Semite for suggesting that there is apartheid. This is how they control the narrative, and they're so strong. And the same, by the way, about the obsession with insisting that we condemn Hamas every time we talk about the genocide. It's as if we have to merit speaking about our struggle. The same people who were silent for years before October 7th, now all of a sudden seem to be concerned about violence. No one actually asks, to condemn Israel as a prerequisite for talking about Jewish struggle. It's like asking Africans or African Americans to condemn slaves for using violence against their slave owners to talk about segregation. Imagine. Dehumanizing Palestinians is another feature of this colonial theology. A lot has been said about this. Whether it's in the public discourse, media, films, theology, we were called the Canaanites, the Amalekites, written about it in my recent book. This dehumanization of Palestinians played a leading role in enabling this genocide. How else do you explain the calls to erase, annihilate, or nuke us? From evangelicals, mind you, who said, bomb Gaza, send nuclear weapons. How else do you understand the current starvation of children in Gaza? Because they don't consider Palestinians equal humans. Eric Hoffer said, a movement can exist without a God, but never without a devil. The devil is clearly today Arabs and Muslims. And of course, it's two sides of the coin. Deeming Palestinians inferior is, the other side is supremacy. Elevating yourself as superior, enter the notion of Judeo-Christian tradition and cultural supremacy. To dominate, you must dehumanize. To dehumanize, you need a discourse that turns the indigenous into terrorists and the acts of colonialism into fighting evil and tyranny, promoting democracy and freedom, law and order, maybe even self-defense. You need those who whisper in the ears of Caesar that he is sent from God and that what he is doing is not just right, but will actually make us all great again. Empires need religion, not just a devil. They need a discourse that declares that they are entitled, chosen, destined, superior. Read the Theology of Apartheid, Christian Zionism, or the Israeli nation-state law. And part of it, of course, is American exceptionalism, which I would argue said was legitimized by U.S. alliance with Israel. Supporting Israel, the people of God, is part and parcel of American exceptionalism. And I can talk a lot about violence. One more feature of colonial theologies is their obsession with violence, which is really hard for us Palestinians to understand, really hard. So, here's what I want to conclude with. To evaluate our position from Zionism and Christian Zionism, this is my final point, Alex. We must understand what Zionism truly is, not the imagined one. And I'm tired of people talking about an imagined, romantic, Western romantic Zionism, or the one in seminaries and churches, but the real Zionism. The Zionism that we heard about today in the first presentation by Lama. The Zionism of the current Israeli government. The Zionism of the nation-state law, which states exactly, explicitly, the right for self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people only. The Zionism of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is not a fringe Zionism. It is the embodiment of what Zionism has always been, whether it's the nation-state law or the current Israeli government. Zionism is Jewish supremacy, and any form of racist supremacy is racism. It's not hateful to say this. In fact, we must emphatically resist the equation of Zionism with Judaism. Critiquing Zionism is not about Judaism as a religion or the Jewish people as a whole. We are grateful for the increasing Jewish voices who are talking about Zionism, speaking about anti-Zionism. I want to read to you what Jewish Voice for Peace say about Zionism. This is Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace is guided by a vision for justice, equality, and freedom for all people. We unequivocally oppose Zionism because it is counter to these ideals. They can't be more clear. I wish Christians spoke with this moral clarity. They continue. Zionism was a false and failed to answer the desperately real question many of our ancestors faced of how to protect Jewish lives from murderous anti-Semitism in Europe. While it had many strains historically, the Zionism that took hold and stands today is a settler colonial movement establishing an apartheid state where Jews have more rights than others. Our own history teaches us how dangerous this can be, end quote. I wish more Christians speak with such moral clarity. And this is my conclusion, that we need to acknowledge and name all forms of Zionism for what it truly is, and stop playing around with soft Zionism. It's time to stop dealing with it as yet another issue of interpretation and theological systems about the relationship between church and Israel, the end times, or intertestamental studies. Rather, we must judge Christian Zionism by the fruits of Zionism. Zionism as an ideology that engaged in settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, a system of apartheid, and currently a genocide. So I ask, can we really put the word Christian before all of this? Are colonialism, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide compatible with Christian ethics and the teachings of Jesus? And if we have many Jewish people today saying no, it is time that Christians speak with such moral clarity. As such, it is time we take a stand. Christian Zionism must be completely and unequivocally rejected as racist, pro-apartheid, inherently anti-Palestinian theology. It is a theology that led to and enabled tolerating a genocide. It is a theology that led to the world tolerating starving children. We must be shaken, we must be outraged, we must be angry by this and say that Zionism and Christian Zionism is incompatible with the Christian truth, period, and we must make it a priority for the church to fight it. Thank you.